welcome back to Goddess of Gore. My name is Vix. If you are new, and here I like to talk about horror, thriller, fantasy and sci-fi books. Now we're well into the spooky season with Halloween fast approaching, so it's high time I gave you a beginner's recommendation to horror books video. I have given one book for each subgenre. They are relatively shorter books, or in my opinion faster paced. Some new, some classics, and hopefully they won't put you off exploring this fun genre that is horror, not just for spooky season but forever. So shall we get on with it? The first book I'm going to recommend falls into the cult and also urban horror category, and that is Rosemary's Baby by Ira Levin. Now, a quick fun fact about this book: it was one of the first books to put horror into the modern urban living setting. So now you can amaze your friends with that tiny nugget of information too. This is set in 1960s New York and it follows newlyweds Rosemary and Guy. I'm going to say it now, Guy is a bit of a knob. He's a wannabe actor, but don't let that put you off. Guy and Rosemary have had their eye on an apartment in this beautiful Gothic building in the hipster side of New York forever. So when a lease comes up, they jump at the chance. The strange history of this building is brought to Rosemary's attention by her best friend Edward, and he has done a lot of research into the place after a string of recent deaths. He tells her to leave, pack a bag and go. This is just too much of a coincidence. And then there's the lovely neighbours always popping by and getting Guy contacts for his acting job. They seem to know everyone who's anyone. When at last Rosemary gets the news that she is pregnant, guess what? Roman and Minnie next door know a great obstetrician who she meets and gives her these tonics and vitamin drinks. And even though they make her feel a bit queasy, Guy still thinks that she should take them because any friend of Roman's is the best of the best. As Rosemary's pregnancy advances, the occurrences in her life seem to get stranger and stranger. Paranoia, gaslighting, deaths all happen in this 300-page fast-paced book from 1967. Could I get through a beginner's guide without Stephen King? Of course not. The first book I'm going to recommend of his is Pet Sematary for the zombie subgenre. I'm always shocked to remember that this is a 500-page book because it is so gripping that it is easy to forget it is that long. This book also starts with a family moving into a new house. This one in Maine, obviously. If you didn't know, pretty much most of King's books are set in the same multiverse. This follows the Creeds and they consist of mom, dad, daughter, son and cat. The house is a perfect example of rural living with only one drawback. The small winding road outside the house is the main route for the huge tankers, often speeding, that Louis Creed wasn't aware of until he steps across the road one day to meet the neighbour Judd. Obviously pets and speeding lorries aren't very compatible, and it's not long before church the kids' beloved cat goes missing. Luckily, in the land behind the Creed's house, there is a pet cemetery, complete with a creepy misspelt sign in a childlike scrawl. And that is pretty much as far as I want to go into this without spoilers. This isn't a straightforward story. Stephen King does like to digress into other aspects of the characters' lives, which can be annoying. But that's just Stephen King, I'm afraid. But this, if a little chunky book isn't your thing, how about The Girl with All the Gifts by M.R. Carey? This falls into the sci-fi horror genre, slightly shorter at 460 pages, and from 2014. This tells the story of Melanie, who is the sweetest little girl in the army barracks. She just wants to please her favourite teacher, Miss Justinia, who she loves very much, and she doesn't understand why the lessons she gives makes her teacher so sad. Every morning Melanie is put in a wheelchair, strapped especially around the head, with guns pointed at her for every second of it. "I won't bite," she laughs. Soldiers don't laugh though. I really don't want to spoil this book because it is best if you go in not knowing anything about it and each reveal stays fresh. I picked it up on a whim from a new release shelf at the library when it was released, and it became an absolute hidden gem. Not a sci-fi fan, How about a good old ghost story? The classic from 1959, The Haunting of Hill House by Shirley Jackson, and there's a reason it stayed so popular. This is about 4 people who have come to Hill House to see if it is a true haunting, a science experiment almost, to study the phenomena and determine if it is real or not. As the night goes on, we get to learn more about the 4 staying in the house as they each tell their own stories, while around them the house is listening. This is a wonderful shorter book, less than 200 pages, and a perfect autumn-October read. But if it's something just as ghostly but more modern, how about Home Before Dark by Riley Sager? This is only 2 years old and just under 400 pages. This book packs a ghost punch. Pow! It's told from the perspective of Maggie, whose father wrote a book about a house they owned for only 3 weeks, fleeing from it in the middle of the night when she was 5. Now, in my opinion, this is one of the creepier books on the list because hauntings are one of my personal scares. So Maggie's dad wrote a bestseller about the spooky goings on in the house over the 3 weeks they lived there. And Maggie's lived under the shadow of its publicity ever since. But while she was at her father's lawyer's office after his death, she found out that her father never sold the house and it was now hers. Her father's last words on the house she has been trying to find out the truth about since she was 5 was to promise him she would never return. But now she has to, once and for all, get the house out of her life and sold. But while she's there, creepy things start to happen, which bring back her forgotten memories of the horrors of 25 years ago, when she was visited continually by 3 ghosts that only she could see: Mr. Shadow, Miss Pennyface, and the girl who can't leave her room. Terrifying, I know. Ghosts and hauntings not your thing then? How about creepy kids instead? This classic by Bernard Taylor from the 1970s is a fantastic foundation. Bonnie is the perfect child. Blonde hair, blue eyes, seemingly innocent. But oh my God, she is evil. The Marlowes already have 4 children of their own. When they go out for an afternoon picnic by a nearby lake, they befriend a very pregnant woman. So much so, she turns up at their door a few days later, and in no hurry to leave, she stays the night, and presently gives birth right there and then to a little girl. The mother is gone by the morning, leaving the child in a cot in the spare room. The Marlowes decide to put her in bed with their own newest arrival, while they phone the police to report the mother gone. They become foster parents for this baby girl, that is, until tragedy strikes the family and they decide to keep the baby they have named Bonnie. The family is struck by one misfortune after another until they are forced from their home and they finally face up to the fact that Bonnie isn't as innocent as she seems. How about we tiptoe into folk horror? I recommend you to read a book by a favourite author of mine, T. Kingfisher. The Twisted Ones by her is a wonderful spooky ride into the life of Mouse and her dog Bongo. Kingfisher has a wonderful style of writing, creepy, moody, but also witty, which I think is perfect for a beginner no matter which book of hers you pick up. Mouse decides to help her father out, who is ill and can't clear his mother's house after she has died. So she gives him a break and sets off with her dog to the middle of the woods where she lived. A quick job? No. Her grandmother was a hoarder and there's useless stuff everywhere. So she seeks solace in the only room that doesn't have any clutter, her step-granddad's room, where she finds his journal. She snuggles in and gives it a read. The nonsensical writings in the book that she thinks are from him slowly, mentally unravelling are all a bit creepy and scary until she sees something when she takes Bongo out for a walk through the woods behind the house, and so she begins to investigate what were the reality of horrors in the grandmother's house. So, as I said, there'd be more Stephen King, and I couldn't not mention the 1974 almost perfect novel. The use of racial slurs twice in this book doesn't make it quite a 5-star. It is My Hero Carrie. This falls into the supernatural powers category. Poor, downtrodden Carrie White is almost as persecuted as the real-life girls that King based her character on. But her comeback is what makes this book. Bullied at school and then at home by a devoutly religious mother, Carrie suffers like no other. But she just has to tell her mother what will happen if she doesn't stop to make her leave her alone. Because Carrie White has a special power, which her mother thinks was given by the devil himself. She can move things with just the sheer will of her mind. And she's been practicing, waiting for the day when she has had enough. But who will suffer the brunt of her power? Her mother, who locks her in a cupboard with her beloved Jesus statues to pray on her knees, or the bullies who make her life a living hell at school? She's going to make sure this year's prom night will be one no one will forget after she's invited into the inner circle for the first time. Maybe it's a good old vampire story you would prefer. I always say vampires are a tough one because they can be boring and tropey, brooding and gothic, and I'm here to tempt you. So I thought The Lesser Dead by Christopher Bullman might do the trick. This is told from the voice of Joey, a 14-year-old vampire who has been a blood sucker for 60 years. This is set in the back streets of 1978 seedy New York, partying by night in the punk clubs and sleeping underground during the day. This kid knows his way around the subway tunnels, feeding on unsuspecting affluent people in their apartments around Central Park. Bleeding these people is just too easy for him. It's pretty easy pickings until one day Joey sees something attacking his friends in the subway. Another kind of vampire, maybe? He doesn't know, but he does know the tunnels of Manhattan aren't as safe as they used to be. Or what about a horror urban legend next? Forbidden by the man, the legend, Clive Barker. This can be found in his Books of Blood, Volume 5. This 51-page short story and tells the tale of Helen, a university student, basing her thesis on graffiti, and she uses a rundown council estate as her subject matter. While studying the art on the walls, she discovers that most of it references the urban legend of Candyman, a story of a local man responsible for child murders, and recent murders and mutilations have been attributed to this mythical man. The locals, she asks, do not want to talk about it for fear of the Candyman finding out about their loose lips. A classic slasher next, and one that doesn't involve teenagers or summer camp. This one is set in a motel. Can you guess? It's Psycho by Robert Bloch. Mary steals some money from the estate agents where she works and decides to take it to her lover, who has taken over his family's business in the hopes of getting out of financial hardship. On the way to see him, she goes to lengths to cover her tracks, but when she takes respite in a motel after taking a wrong turn off, she suffers from guilt and plans to take the money back minus what she's already spent. So this is a woman who has broken the law. That's a red flag for a slasher. The rules say she has to go, and she does. wonderfully in an infamous shower scene. But I'm getting ahead of myself. At the motel, she meets Norman, a single man who lives with his mummy in a large house on the grounds of the motel they run together. His mother is housebound, but she certainly has a big mouth because Mary can hear Norman and his mother arguing later on. As I said, Mary is no more, and her boyfriend and sister soon raise the alarm when she doesn't turn up at either houses, and after waiting for the police to investigate, they decide to go to the last place the police said she was and take a look for themselves. If you haven't seen the film, you're in for a treat with this book, because yes, the false psychology at the end is a bit of a letdown, but all in all, it's a fantastic high-octane slasher thriller that I know you'll adore. So what's left in the subgenres? There's actually loads, but I've only got 2 left. Next is a possession story, and believe me, there is a gazillion of these. Obviously, I could have gone with The Exorcist, but I think maybe it's a bit scary, or Head Full of Ghosts, which I think is plenty scary. So I went with a modern author with a witty, gossipy way of writing that I fell in love with when I read his book, My Best Friend's Exorcism by Grady Hendrix. Grady is a terrific storyteller, and this is probably one of my top 2 favourites of his. It does change depending on what day of the week it is though. This is so 80s it hurts. You can definitely tell Grady lived through this era, and the language used in this book depicts the time it was set in. It tells the story of Gretchen and Abby, best friends for years, but ever since they got to high school, Gretchen has changed. This book follows the days, weeks and months into Gretchen's supposed possession, as Abby and Gretchen's family believe she is. The spiralling downfall of her friend's appearance and behaviour, and the subsequent exorcism that follows. This is light-hearted, heartbreaking and gross. It's fabulous. And then, for my final proposal to guide you on to the path of horror, I recommend the 160-page novella Hellbound Heart by Clive Barker. This fits a horror fantasy section. Okay, gory horror fantasy section. But what the hell? This channel is called Goddess of Gore, and this follows Frank Cotton and his insatiable appetite for dark pleasures, which has brought him to this wooden, lacquered puzzle box. I have to be careful. I don't want to open it, because once opened, it promises exquisite pleasure, but instead it brings torture. Same difference, some might say. Julia, his lover and sister-in-law, has figured out a way to save Frank's skin, literally, and it's filled with sadomasochistic demons and humans. Frank and Julia are unlikable little deviants who are so well suited, and the beings in the world kept in this little box are terrifying. But my God, can Clive Barker write them in such a beautiful way? It is my opinion that this is the gateway book into Clive Barker's storytelling, but it's one that you need to read with caution. But heck, don't worry, if you don't want to read it now, you soon will. That's it. Let me put this down. That's the lot. Considering 10 of these books have been adapted into films, that should tell you how much they have influenced readers ever since they were published, and I hope they will have as much of an impact on you too. I do hope I've recommended something for you to pick up, even if it's just for the Halloween weekend reading. But if I've whetted your appetite, I would personally like to welcome you to the horror family. You'll have a lot of fun finding out what your creepy favourites are. Maybe you would like to subscribe for more recommendations. I'll link my other videos where I get specific with my suggestions for topics. So far I've done folk horror, cozy witch and kids on bikes, with more planned for the end of the year. I'm very excited to get dressed up for those. So I will leave you, as I always do, with a little quote or rhyme. Last night I saw upon the stair a little man who wasn't there. He wasn't there again today. Oh, how I wish he'd go away. Until next time. Bye bye.